This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema from all around the globe. Get a whole month free at mubi.com/ModernGurlz. Analyzing the outfits in Wuthering Heights. I've analyzed the outfits in a lot of different movies over the years, with Margot Robbie making two separate appearances, once for Harley Quinn and once for Barbie. Today we're going to be taking a look at her latest movie to cause a stir, Wuthering Heights, which received a lot of attention for its sexy take on Emily Bronte's 1847 novel. We'll be focusing on all of Kathy's outfits over the course of her very short life, with every corset, every cross, and every crazy hairdo having something important to say. And just to be clear, this won't be a review of the film. I have a whole other video for that. Now let's get into it. When we first meet Kathy, she's but a child, and her clothing is entirely practical. The kind of garments that a girl running wild across the moors would actually wear comfortably. The Earnshaws have clearly fallen on hard times, but her clothing still hints at their former wealth, with Kathy's wardrobe featuring a variety of florals and plaids. The combination is reminiscent of what Merle Oberon wore in the 1939 version of Wuthering Heights, and it's an interesting callback to the film that essentially set the Hollywood precedent of only adapting the first half of the novel. It's important to remember that during the film's late 1700s setting, clothing wasn't mass-produced, so the more ornate something was, the more expensive it was to buy. Kathy mixes and matches these patterns at a whim, highlighting how at this point in time she's more free-spirited and less concerned about how she's perceived, as evidenced by her attendance at a hanging. The simplicity of her clothing isn't all that dissimilar from Heathcliff's or Nellie's, and they're dressed like children from the same world, because for now, they are. When we're reintroduced to Kathy as a young woman, she's still living at Wuthering Heights and unbetrothed, something her father blames on her wild personality and her relationship with Heathcliff, while the truth of the matter is that his drunkenness has likely scared off any potential suitor she might have had. The family's financial decline is now even more apparent, with her clothing becoming even more simplistic than it was when she was a child. Her florals have been replaced with solid patterns, perhaps reflecting her dwindling romanticism, although the stripes and plaids remain. Kathy's wardrobe continues to be made up of shades of red alongside black and white. Red is often associated with romance and lust, but also violence and rage. The black that cuts through her outfits carries connotations of mystery, depression, and formality, while the white gestures towards innocence and hope, but also boredom and emptiness. It's a combination that reads as gothic as much as dramatic. Costume designer Jacqueline Duran described the color choices as being inspired by the history of the femme fatale, and how Kathy and that archetype were enmeshed with each other throughout the film. Duran's 20-year career has received quite the varied response. She's of course responsible for Keira Knightley's green dress in 2007's Atonement, which is perhaps one of the most iconic film costumes of the 21st century. But she's also the one behind Emma Watson's yellow ball gown in the 2017 live-action Beauty and the Beast, which still draws ire from Disney fans to this day. She has a habit of taking creative liberties with period clothing, as evidenced by Pride and Prejudice, Anna Karenina, Little Women, and most recently, Wuthering Heights, with Duran saying of the costumes in the film, quote, "Our dates are all confused in the sense that we're not representing a moment in time at all. We're just picking images or styles that we like." And throughout the film, you can spot references to Elizabethan, Georgian, Victorian, and mid-century fashion trends. Now, I'm not a stickler for historical accuracy when it comes to costume design, as long as it serves a purpose within the context of the film. And I don't think we should be playing the game of how accurate is it when certain trends of the past don't carry the same meaning in the present, and refusing to adjust them for the times would be confusing for audiences. Director Emerald Fennell described Kathy's look as Milkmaid, but with an edge. The silhouette of Kathy's clothing in her youth is recognizably period, being vaguely reminiscent of the German dirndl, a folk dress originating in the 1500s that was distinguished by a fitted bodice worn over a blouse and a full skirt. The bodice in particular resembles a pair of stays, the precursor to the corset, which hints at the regressive nature of society during the era, as well as the BDSM undertones that Fennell tends to gravitate towards in her work. Kathy's outfits while traipsing around the moors were also inspired by the 1964 French film Angélique, a story about a naive girl who's made to marry a wealthy noble. Sound familiar? Crucially, Kathy's clothing at this point isn't too dissimilar from what the working class women in the film are wearing. Besides making it obvious that in spite of her title, Kathy is poor, it also creates a visual unity between her and Heathcliff. They just look like a farm boy and a milkmaid. She's electing, consciously or not, to dress down to his level, because at this point in the story, the two are still on the same page. However, you'll notice that unlike the other female characters, Kathy wears her hair undone, which would have been quite scandalous for the time period. Updos were considered a sign of modesty and maturity, especially amongst women of the upper class, and loose hair was really only associated with the bedroom. By having Kathy wear her hair down, particularly around Heathcliff, it highlights how she sees him not only in a romantic way, but a sexual one. Another telling detail about her current social standing is Kathy's habit of rewearing her clothing. It's economical, but it's also symbolic of how repetitive and stagnant her life feels. She's desperate for a change, for something new, and this restlessness is reflected in her short temper and petulance. Kathy only gets a taste of a different life after her stay with the Lintons, where she returns to Wuthering Heights in an entirely new outfit. She looks every bit the proper young lady, switching out her worn cotton skirts for bright red velvet, donning a matching blouse and stays, decorating her hair with ribbons and flowers, and even getting her first piece of jewelry, a gold heart locket, a not-so-subtle indication of Edgar's intentions. She sticks out like a sore thumb amongst the dirt and grime of Wuthering Heights, immediately signaling the gap between the Lintons and the Earnshaws, and it's no surprise that Kathy is so taken by the idea of marrying into such a wealthy home. This desire is reflected in Kathy's immediate adoption of the red velvet skirt into her wardrobe, completely ignoring its impracticality. The combination of her old clothing with the new shows Kathy's internal battle between her simple life at Wuthering Heights with Heathcliff and the grandeur of Thrushcross Grange with Edgar. The fact that she retains the same silhouette, however, shows where her heart truly lies, even if Heathcliff doesn't realize it. But with the red skirt being the focal point, we know what her decision will be. Kathy waits an entire year for Heathcliff to return, but after much prodding and pleading from Nellie, she eventually relents and marries Edgar. While getting dressed for the wedding, she demands that Nellie tie her corset as tight as possible, causing the laces to dig into her skin and leaving a series of bloody scratches along her back. Many members of the historical fashion community balked at this inclusion, as it would have been standard practice at the time to wear a chemise under a corset precisely to prevent this sort of discomfort. But what this moment lacks in historical accuracy, it makes up for in symbolism. Kathy wants to be in pain. It's her way of punishing herself for betraying Heathcliff. It also creates a parallel to his scarred back, highlighting how both are victims of their social standing, with Heathcliff being punished for being a ward and Kathy for being a woman. Her wedding gown was described by Duran as, quote, an amalgam of Victorian and 1950s fashion, from Winterhalter to Charles James. Franz Xaver Winterhalter was a German painter who became a favorite of numerous European nobles in the mid-1800s, including France's Empress Eugenie, Spain's Queen Isabella II, England's Queen Victoria, and Austria's Empress Sissi. Charles James was known for his exquisite haute couture gowns, which had an elaborate sculptural quality to them and were all the rage in the 1950s, with his work even serving as the inspiration for the 2014 Met Gala. Obviously, neither reference is true to the film's late 18th century setting, but it creates a look that is undeniably bridal. Although white dresses have become the standard for weddings, that's a fairly new development, and during Kathy's time, you just would have worn the finest dress you could get your hands on, color be damned. The puffed sleeves, tiara, and cathedral-length veil also remind me of Princess Diana's wedding dress in 1981, which itself was inspired by Victorian fashions. And with both women being in unhappy marriages and dying at early ages, I don't think the similarities are sheer coincidence. The veil also creates a ghostly effect, hinting at Kathy's role in the novel, where her spirit haunts Heathcliff from the afterlife. On her wedding night, Kathy is all wrapped up in sheer, shiny cellophane, a literal representation of her gifting herself to Edgar. According to Duran, the look was inspired by two separate references, a pinup model from the 1950s and a design from Thierry Mugler's spring 1996 runway show. It's a huge deviation from everything else Kathy has worn thus far. The silhouette is incredibly modern, almost Barbie-esque, making it clear that Kathy is no longer the same young woman who is running around on the moors. The fabric is undeniably artificial, highlighting how her attraction to Edgar is all an act, while the light pink hue is deceptively girly and innocent, making her the epitome of a blushing bride, while also reflecting how clueless she is when it comes to the responsibilities of marriage. I also can't help but be reminded of the 1973 self-help book, The Total Woman.
Well, the homemaker who gets married and has little kids sometimes gets into a rut. and she sort of lets herself go to pop, so to speak. And I'm just saying, hey, snap out of it. Dress up for him like you used to.
Or indeed dress down, because one of your people wears nothing but saran wrap when she meets him at the door.
Whatever turns him on.
The author, Maribel Morgan, recommended women greet their husbands at the door in sexy outfits, which later spiraled into people thinking that wearing nothing but saran wrap would bring the spark back into their marriages.
And are you in for a treat?
What? Wait! What is that, saran wrap?
That's right, bucket breath.
Evelyn, are you gone insane? God, people can see you.
It's a funny reference because even though Kathy has all of these pent-up sexual urges, she's still a virgin and doesn't actually know how to seduce a man. So she just relies on what others have told her is the right thing to do. Edgar is wealthier than Kathy could have ever imagined, and the level of ornamentation at Thrushcross Grange is almost otherworldly. This excess is mirrored in Kathy's wardrobe, which becomes more lavish and anachronistic than anything she'd worn at Wuthering Heights. For these more flashy looks, Duran drew inspiration from how period fashion was interpreted in old Hollywood classics, but they're just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to grandiose historical dramas. But unfortunately, not a lot of them are widely available, which is why Mubi is so great. Mubi is a curated streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema from all around the globe. From iconic directors to emerging auteurs, there is always something new to discover. With Mubi, each and every film is hand-selected by its team of curators. Discover the best of cinema at your fingertips, streaming anytime, anywhere. If you like the sort of magical realism that Emerald Fennell hints at in Wuthering Heights, then you've got to watch 2006's The Fall by Tarsum Singh, which is available exclusively on Mubi, who effectively saved it from becoming lost media, and thank God for that. The entire film has absolutely breathtaking visuals that feel like you've just stepped into a dream. Not to mention some really unique costumes designed by the one and only Eiko Ishioka, who I've talked about at length half a dozen times on this channel. And if you want to see historical inaccuracies done right, The Fall is a great place to start. You can try Mubi free for 30 days at mubi.com/moderngurlz. That's mubi.com/moderngurlz for a whole month of great cinema for free. As Isabella mentions, she's picked out all of Kathy's new dresses herself, sourcing them from France, Belgium, and Italy, regions that at the time were considered not only the most advanced when it came to textile production and dressmaking, but home to some of the most fashionable courts in the world, emphasizing how Kathy is the new queen of the castle. The ensembles aren't a total departure from what she's worn before, but you can feel the Linton's influence in the details. There's just a lot more of everything. More jewelry, more hair, more ribbons, more ruffles, all of which creates a fussier, frillier look. The dominant color of this period shifts to white, continuing the bridal motif and emphasizing how in society's eyes, all Kathy is now is Edgar's wife. She's hiding the darker parts of herself to conform to the pure and innocent image expected of her, but red never fully disappears, a reminder that her true self is lurking just beneath the surface. Corsetry remains a through line in her wardrobe, but she's swapped out her 18th century stays for 20th century waist cinchers, a stiffer style with more fetishistic associations. Stays were practical and commonplace, something every woman wore regardless of class, and the shift emphasizes that Kathy's body is now being shaped for someone else's pleasure rather than her own comfort. Although Kathy and Nellie had some overlap in their wardrobe previously, when they moved to Thrushcross Grange, their status as master and servant starts to define them. Nellie's wardrobe shifts into the 1850s with very few modern influences, highlighting how she's representative of the more restrictive expectations of the era. With her tight hair and simple black dresses, she's an austere figure, and we can see how that's reflected in her and Kathy's relationship, with Nellie frequently scolding her for her behavior. And as their visuals grow more disjointed, so does Nellie's resentment. Emerald Fennell wanted Isabella to be Kathy's visual opposite as well, giving the younger girl wild and frizzy hair to highlight her childish nature, while Kathy was given more elaborate styles that showed how she was being molded into a specific image. It's implied that Isabella is behind many of Kathy's hairstyles, with Isabella seeing her as a sort of doll to play with. The most obvious of these is the corset braid, which uses the ribbons Isabella so enjoys and is symbolic of how Kathy's marriage to Edgar is a form of voluntary imprisonment. For Kathy's go-to hairstyle, hair and makeup designer Sean Miller drew inspiration from a screen test photograph of Vivian Leigh in Gone with the Wind, which the crew jokingly referred to as horns because of their silhouette. The jewelry was borrowed from the Chanel archives, and it's excessive to a degree that it becomes a mask, another thing for Kathy to hide behind. Aside from the diamond necklaces and pearl chokers, Kathy also gravitates towards chunky crosses, which are a fun nod to the story's Gothic origins. Fennell also mentioned that the placement of these crosses served a symbolic purpose, with Kathy often using them to draw attention to her chest, making it clear that she still wants to be desired. We get a quick shot of Kathy wearing a pair of sunglasses, and while they may look completely modern, they've actually been around since the Victorian era. Starting off as railway spectacles, they were initially worn as a way of protecting your eyes from the elements while traveling, then evolved into a medical accessory for those whose eyes were sensitive to light, say from syphilis. I don't think implying Kathy has an STD was Fennell's intention, but considering the pregnancy complications she later experiences, perhaps it was just some very subtle foreshadowing. It's also a physical manifestation of the saying, rose-colored glasses, with Kathy choosing to ignore the negative aspects of her new lifestyle. Her existence at Thrushcross Grange is a blur of Christmas parties, overindulgent dinners, and passionless nights with Edgar, and Kathy realizes that the banality of her life wasn't exclusive to the miseries of Wuthering Heights. As a result, she continues re-wearing her outfits, swapping out different accessories to create the illusion of variety. It's so subtle at times that you might not even notice it, like this sparkly dinner dress, which she wears with a different corset, or the white puff sleeve dress with red trim, which turns up at least 4 separate times. On her first return to Wuthering Heights since the wedding, she wears a bold red cape alongside a shiny silver gown. She stands in stark contrast to her father's surroundings, but instead of being a triumphant moment, she's just made to feel like a disappointment. The cape is also reminiscent of Little Red Riding Hood. Kathy is walking back into the wolf's territory, with her father's emotional abuse threatening to eat her alive. Thankfully, she can run home and forget all about him, continuing to numb the pain with the excess of Thrushcross Grange. When Kathy learns of Heathcliff's return, she runs to the moors while wearing an ensemble that isn't too unlike what she was wearing the last time she saw him. She stripped herself of everything that ties her to Edgar, the ribbons, the jewels, even her hair is simpler. She wants Heathcliff to see her as she was, not who she's become. This simplicity connects the two of them, bringing them back to their childhood, a time when there was still hope that they could be together. This is also the most red that she's worn in a while, highlighting how Heathcliff has reignited her passion. At dinner, she makes a deliberate show of Edgar's wealth, refusing to feel diminished by Heathcliff's own newfound success. But with the absence of her signature color, you can feel her weakness, her desperation. Her makeup is flashy, with several shiny beads covering her cheeks, and while it first comes across as a whimsical look meant to draw Heathcliff's attention, its resemblance to sweat reflects the tension in the room. When she and Isabella later argue over Heathcliff, Kathy is wearing a much darker outfit than usual. The look draws on Swiss peasant clothing of the mid-1800s, and everything about it, the chains, the stiff bodice, read like she's suiting up for battle. More to the point, it makes her argument for her. She's telling Isabella that she knows what Heathcliff is and she isn't afraid of it, whereas Isabella, in her pink ruffly dress, is just a little girl, and she won't be able to handle him. While Heathcliff stays at Thrushcross Grange, Kathy continues putting on a show, wearing all of the jewels and fancy dresses that Edgar bought for her. That is until her father's death, which brings Kathy back to Wuthering Heights in a similar outfit as the last time, but in all white instead. Although it presents her as the distraught, innocent daughter, when she goes out in the rain, the entire ensemble is soaked through, creating quite a revealing look. And finally, she and Heathcliff give in to their urges. And thus begins Kathy's mourning period and her affair with Heathcliff. She's racked with guilt on multiple fronts, not only for abandoning her father at Wuthering Heights to drink himself to death, but for the ongoing betrayal of Edgar. She attends her father's funeral in a black gown and veil, the opposite of her wedding ensemble, and instead of symbolizing the beginning of a relationship, it's the end of one. Victorian social etiquette dictated that both men and women wear darker clothing while mourning, but women bore the greater burden of it. A widow was expected to remain in full black for several years, and to change one's clothing too early was considered disrespectful to the dead. And if the widow happened to still be young and attractive, suggestive of sexual promiscuity. Because of these associations, many women actually avoided black when they didn't have to wear it, which makes it all the more pointed that Kathy had been wearing it long before her father died. She was always unusual. Kathy's youthful infatuation with Heathcliff had life and passion and desire, something reflected in all of the red that she wore. But as adults, their love is darker, with both bringing out the worst in each other. Because she's leading a double life, she still dresses in the clothing styles associated with Edgar, but in a color palette more associated with Heathcliff. She continues to wear her chunky crosses, but the connotation is different now. She knows she's sinning, but she's doing it anyway. Her hair during this period becomes more horn-like than ever, almost reminiscent of 1940s victory rolls, and the end result reads as both polished and devilish. Kathy's way of reminding everyone in the room, and perhaps herself, exactly what she is. You'll also notice that the ribbons are gone, a subtle way of signaling that the friendship between Kathy and Isabella is over. Her clothing only deviates from this formula when she confronts Nellie, with the outfit having an imposing Elizabethan quality to it. She isn't showing any skin, and the silhouette is stiff and pointed. She's refusing to let Nellie in, refusing to be talked out of anything, and it's a moment where she truly looks like the villain. Besides the pops of red mirroring her anger, it's also our final glimpse of Kathy at her true power, before everything starts to fall apart. After Heathcliff marries Isabella, Kathy has a mental breakdown, refusing to leave her room or get dressed. All she wears are nightgowns, reflecting her true desires. You can track the trajectory of Kathy's life from her sleepwear alone. At Wuthering Heights, she wears a simple chemise. There's no performance in it because she has no audience. At the Lintons, the nightgown is transformed into a shiny monstrosity, complete with an accompanying robe and a collar that calls to mind Elizabethan ruffs. It's the nightgown of a queen, which is exactly how Edgar treats her, placing her on an impossible pedestal. And then when she lays dying, the nightgown reverts back to the chemise, back to the girl on the moors. It holds all of her regrets, her desire to go back in time, to undo the choice that brought her here. The costumes in Wuthering Heights weren't the most controversial part of the movie, but they were up there. And I think a lot of the negative response stemmed from the film arriving in close proximity to other period dramas like Frankenstein, Nosferatu, and Poor Things, all of which took creative liberties with their costumes, but in ways that the general public was more receptive to. And honestly, I think part of the problem is that those films leaned fully into the fantasy aspects, whereas Wuthering Heights felt caught in the middle. Not grounded enough to satisfy purists of the source material, nor strange enough to claim itself as being loosely inspired. It's worth noting, though, that if you've seen any of the previous adaptations, deviation from historical accuracy is practically a tradition at this point, and at least the 2026 version is trying to do something different. What tends to get lost in the conversation about Wuthering Heights is how much meaning is actually embedded into the character's wardrobe. And at the end of the day, the costumes are doing exactly what they were designed to do. They're telling Kathy's story. Whether or not that story needed to be told in this way is a different conversation entirely. What did you think of the costumes in Wuthering Heights? I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!